My name is Hans Jensevik. I started my career as a teacher in economics at the University of Gothenburg and researcher at the Chalmers University of Technology, Department of Urban Design and Planning at the end of 1960s. Then Sweden built 1 million apartments in 10 years. This knowledge, how to build cities in a cost-effective way, I brought to the municipality of Uppsala in 1970. I worked there and advanced to Chief Economic Officer. In 1988, I started a company and continued to work with municipalities. Now I am 75 years of age and Senior Chief Analyst in a company that I have owned and led in more than 25 years, Svensk KommunRating, Swedish rating of local authorities. In Sweden there are 290 municipalities and 21 regions. Together they own a private finance and credit company called KommunInvest. I have made this video because there are more than 30 municipalities that have borrowed so much money from this credit company that they will not be able to repay their loans. In principle they could, but it would mean such major restrictions in their supplies that it can't be considered politically possible. Loans are cheap today, and many more municipalities than those 30 mentioned are heading into the same situation. This is nothing new. It has been like this a long time. I have talked about this for politicians, newspapers and the various authorities for more than 15 years, but nothing has happened. Overcrowded municipalities with loans that can bring a finance company into failure are considered to be manageable under normal circumstances. That's the case, but soon in the next recession, the circumstances are no longer normal. Then this finance company, together with all other difficulties facing Sweden, becomes a black swan. I and many economists think that we have now repeated all the mistakes that triggered a homemade financial and real estate crisis in the early 1990s. I start here with that as a macro view and end this video with an analysis of a typical municipality that can't pay back its loan. Now first macro view. Let me show a picture. What you see in the chart is the employment rate between the ages of 16 and 64 from 1985 to 1998 in Sweden. It indicates the percentage of the population that was employed each year. It starts in 1985 with several years of economic growth due to an increasing boom. This growth took a downward turn in 1990 in a dramatic decline in Sweden that persisted for several years. It became deep for two reasons. A homemade financial and real estate crisis was triggered at the same time as the start of a long international recession. With general elections in 1991, the ruling Labour Party, the Social Democrats, spent all of the boom's surplus in reform promises to voters instead of chilling down the economy by saving money to keep demand up in the upcoming recession. This meant that when the economy fell down after the 1991 elections, the country also fell through the bottom of the upcoming recession. The politicians were unable to act. They could not do anything. When 1% corresponded to 51,000 people, and the employment rate fell more than 10%, from 83%, as you can see, below 72%. More than 500,000 went out into open unemployment in a few years. Worse still, it took many years before the international economy strengthened and Sweden recovered. As you also can see, the unemployment was high for many years. Owners of houses and apartments could not pay their loans, which triggered a crisis for lending banks. The state had to rescue the banks by raising distressed loans as government debt. People had to leave their homes with low housing compensation, and many older people today still pay loans on real estate they left almost 30 years ago. It was a crisis we elderly remember, but the younger does not know much about it, and they run Sweden today. Let me make the picture more interesting. In this picture, I had drawn the percentage of employed persons. Also for the last 4 years, there are statistics, namely between 2013 and 2016. It is also cyclically adjusted. 1985 is equivalent to 2013 and 1986 corresponding to 2014, etc. We have the same position now as 28 years ago. Sweden is in a rising economy. Now, 28 years later, the percentage of employed person is 4.4% lower. This means that the employment rate of the population is 4.4% lower. The proportion of taxpayer is also 4.4% lower. With this development, we can conclude that the money for the welfare is about to end at a very slow pace. The Swedish economy is stressed by two phenomena. The first being that economic growth is too low to finance an unchanged large public sector that has lower productivity than the private sector. It is called the Bomohl effect, well known by economists. The second is that the population is constantly increasing by immigrants with a lower employment rate than the indigenous population. This is not sustainable in the long run, and Sweden is slowly ceasing to be a welfare state. The development is obvious for all who want to see the fact. 28 years ago, 8 million lived in Sweden. Today we are 10 million. We can produce and fund welfare for 8 million, not for 10 million. Let me enter some more information into the image. Sweden is today in the same position as 28 years ago. Sweden is in a period of overheated economy with elections in the fall of 2018. Again, the ruling Labour Party, Social Democrats, together with the Greens, are spending the surplus in voter promises of new reforms instead of chilling down the economy by saving money to keep demand up in the coming recession. The other political parties do the same. Actually, the voters have no real alternative in the election. Sweden is currently between the two question marks in the picture. And the blue line indicates December 31, 2018. Already now the first signs of a declining housing market are visible. Prices are falling and apartments are left empty in the big cities. Those in charge in both public and private sector talk about a forthcoming soft landing for the market at a lower, more healthy level. Any idea of a long and stubborn decline due to a slow loss of demand in the whole economy, as 28 years ago, is not even considered by the generation that now is in power in Sweden. They have no experience of what happened 28 years ago. Sweden can again fall through the bottom when the recession hits. Here is my next picture. Anyone who gives loans to KommunInvest will be able to think through the situation when viewing this video. KommunInvest has more than 30 municipalities that will not be able to repay their loans to this finance company owned and run by local politicians. And more municipalities are entering the same situation. The politicians like to promote the image of Sweden, a country that has such a strong economy that it can handle all failures when the situation is at its peak. According to that image of Sweden, the politicians in the parliament think that only a few challenges at a time appears and can easily be handled. That was not the case 28 years ago. Serious problems were reported promptly. Something triggered a bank to fall, then another one, in a downward spiral. Even then, there was an official image of Sweden intended to calm the citizens that the politicians quickly had to abandon. It showed up to be a lie, as it is today. Now all banks are better consolidated, but the volumes of loans to households are several times higher. To this will be added KommunInvest as a black swan. I think it might fail at any time, but probably in 2 to 4 years, then it is clear that Sweden has a severe downturn in next recession. A failing KommunInvest could send Sweden to the same type of bottom as 28 years ago. Now my last image in this area. If Sweden falls down to the bottom, then every percentage does not represent about 51,000 people. For now we are not 8 million, but 10 million inhabitants. Each percentage is 60,800 today. If the country falls 10%, as 28 years ago, over 600,000 taxpayers will be unemployed and will live on government and municipal contributions. During these 28 years, Sweden has also granted more than 2 million resident permits for immigrants. The public burden of welfare benefits become significant. It will be difficult for those taxpayers who choose to remain in Sweden. Here you have seen a scenario which can be judged by implying a probability of its outcome. Is the probability so high that it is to be reckoned with? I think so. In order to test, I wrote an article about the scenario and sent it to the Sweden's daily leading economic news magazine, Dagens Industri, Daily Industry in English. The article was accepted and published, as you can see here. Of course, my chart was not approved, but they did a much better one. What you see here, Swedish economists know and discuss, it has indeed relevant probability. A person who is also concerned about today's situation is Göran Persson, who can take credit for taking Sweden out of the deep crisis of the 1990s, first as a Minister of Finance and later Prime Minister. He was interviewed in the same magazine that published my article a month later. If they first take the title, which in English is Göran Perssons concern for Sweden, it is building up to a perfect storm. Yes, you heard right. It is building up to a perfect storm. He agrees that the situation is worrying because of the overheated economy and the foolish political ideas of consuming instead of saving the surplus of the boom. But he also presents several structural reforms that should have been implemented and now instead represents serious risks. His second concern is today's politicians, the 349 members of the Swedish Parliament. They clearly do not understand the current situation in Sweden. Only a few of them have any personal experience of what happened 28 years ago. Another thing is that the young politicians today are not the same kind as the politicians of 28 years ago. They are not community builders. They are power players. Power players that prefer the image of Sweden instead of the real Sweden. This introduction is a serious framework to convince you that KommunInvest is a black swan.
It is time to meet a municipality that will not be able to repay its loans to the municipal finance company KommunInvest. I choose an early one in the list, which have developed a few clear weaknesses, easy to understand. It is Askersund, a municipality slightly smaller than the average size in Sweden. There are 34 of the kind that together represent a significant financial risk when everyone borrows through KommunInvest. What you have seen here for a few seconds is the interface of the analysis system that I use when I rate Sweden's 290 municipalities. It's a lot of information. Yes, municipalities are complicated things. But there is a logic. A sports fan asks someone else who has seen a football game, how did it go? And that's the first important question for analysis. You must start with a result to keep the listener interested. You have a rating matrix at the top right here, and at the top left is the name of the municipality. This municipality is called Askersund and has a rating D on a scale comprising A, B, C, D. Once you know the result, you are often motivated to learn more, and we can proceed systematically into all the statistics. The rating matrix also provides guidance through 4 subgrades and the 4 analysis question. And you see that the lowest subgrade determines the final rating, here D. That is what the municipality has to focus on to improve its rating. And a rating is often a closed rating, but we use what we call open rating, so a local authority can see how to improve its rating and do it itself. The analysis question concerns here all the municipalities' future commitments in the form of different kinds of debts. This first analysis question comprises two key factors, and every key factor again has 4-degree range: good, fair, weak and poor. Here, as in the majority of cases, the first key factor is the most important and also determines the subgrade in the rating matrix. In this case, the grade poor gives the grade D in the rating matrix. This first analysis question indicates high future commitments, and the next question is how these look like, and that is shown in the chart and in the table further down. You can see the gross amount of liabilities on the highest curve of the chart, and for Askersund the point is here at the curve. It's easier to read the table, and in it the gross amount of liabilities is 160,843 Swedish crowns per inhabitant. Now all municipalities have assets that are not necessary to have for carrying out the activities that the municipality must perform by law. Such selected assets, you have them here, can be valued and used to reduce the value of the amount of liabilities to get a relevant net amount of liabilities. Such selected assets can in a bad situation be sold. You have the net amount of liabilities here. In this case, you can see that the net amount of liability is high, 93,108 Swedish crowns per inhabitant, perhaps too high to could be realized, which must be the focus in the next part of the analysis. Before we look at that, let us take note of the complete key factor of the total amount of liabilities. We go deeper in the system. Now we are where the key factor amount of liabilities is presented in detail for Askersund municipality. First, a large chart to the left and a table to the right where all the commitments are presented. These are the long and short debts of the administration. Next debt, an important one, consists of pensions for the employees of the municipality. According to agreements with the unions, for the municipalities are insurance companies for a considerable part of their employees' pensions. Next one, you have the guarantees such as bails given to different organizations, especially in Sweden to municipality-owned companies. Clear and lucid grades are important, and there is also a grade standard for the key factor here. If the net amount, as you have here, of the liabilities passes critical level 1, which is 39,800 Swedish crowns per inhabitants, a burden is set. Here, the net amount of liabilities passes all three critical levels, which is enough to move the grade 3 steps to the right to the grade poor. The next question is whether the residents in Askersund have such high incomes that they can withstand tax increases to pay the municipality's loans. At the bottom right, here is a diagram that clarifies that question. The blue field indicates that the residents do not have sufficient income, but Askersund is above that level. In this case, no burden is set. But 3 burden is enough to have the grade poor. With regard to opportunities to raise taxes and pay loans, there are several limitations. Tax increases can only contribute little in a municipality inundated with loans like this one. Before we return to interface, we can observe one thing more, that the gross amount of liability has increased rapidly in recent years. It is rapidly increasing along this curve, and you can ask what is going on. If the rating matrix is consulted again, the analysis question financial risk is next weak point here. Here is the subgrade C. The 6 key factors that indicate the type of risk involved here contains 2 with the grade poor, that we see here. The first indicate risk due to high investments, and that is new information. And the last factor indicates the risk of high future commitments for various reasons, and that is not new information. 2 indicated risk give the subgrade C. Let us look at the first key factor, investment level. Now you will meet a key factor in Swedish, but you will understand the message. For all 9 years, from 2008 to 2016, the level of investment is above the first critical level, and some years even above the second critical level. In the last 2 years, for which statistics are available, investment are sky high. The municipality has invested 25 and 20% of the total operating income in 2015 and 2016, and that is much. Before we go back to interface, we should observe that the middle point on a 5-year trend that we use for measuring the risk, that point is above all 3 levels, and have 3 burdens, and the grade of the key factor is poor, and that indicates a heavy risk. Let's go back to interface. Before we leave the analysis question risk, we see one key factor of the 3 that make up the tax base is weak, and that is population. Let us look at it. We go there. You meet a factor in Swedish again. Here we have the key factor population in Askersund. The chart to the left shows the annual population change. It begins with 2 years of reduced population, and then you have 4 years of growing to end with decreasing population again. What does that mean? Something positive happens in the municipality for 4 years, when normally there's an annual decline in population. Let me guess that the state places immigrants in the municipality, and when that has been carried out, we can see that the indigenous population continue to move. The second diagram to the left shows the change of population for a period of 10 years and confirm that people leave the municipality. Something is wrong with the municipality's attractiveness. Probably a lack of activity in the local business community. In the 2 diagram to the right, the municipality's age composition is compared to the country's average. You see that the young moves out and the elderly remains. In particular, the important community builder generation, 26 to 44 years of age, moves. In a municipality like this, with old people and immigrants, mostly without occupation, the question remains, who will pay the municipality's debts? Let us go back to the interface. A third analysis question does not get the highest rating, and it is financial health, or how the day-to-day economy is managed. It has subgrade B. The economy could thus be treated better. Here are 5 key factors, and the first one, operating cash flow, is the most important one. You have the key factor operating cash flow in the small chart, and the 5-year mid-trend average point must be above the 3 critical levels. It is not. It is a requirement that the operating cash flow funds all future investments and amortization. It is too low, as you see. It looked good in 2016, but there's a general election soon, and thus the state gives much money to the municipalities to help them attract voters. It looks like this in almost all municipalities. Next, two key factors measure the administration's debt level. The fourth, the liquidity, and the last factor, asset building capacity. That measure the relationship between operating cash flow and investment level. As was recently said, the operating cash flow must fund all future investments and amortizations. The grade poor for the fifth key factor, asset building capacity, indicates that it is far from the case in Askersund. Let us look at the key factor, a Swedish one again. Here you have the key factor, asset building capacity for Askersund. You remember how the investment looked. Here they are again. A straight red line over 9 years indicates the average investment level as a percentage of total revenue, and it is 10.2%. The pink curve here is operating cash flow, and the pink straight line of 4.7% indicates its average over the 9 years. What the cash flow does not finance of the investment must be covered by loans. The difference between the two lines is 5.5% of the total revenue and must be paid with loans during these 9 years. And that's what has happened, and the local authority have been heavily indebted. Let's go back to interface. Let's sum it up. Here we have a heavily indebted municipality that is investing itself to death. In the background there is a local business sector lacking in activity and attractiveness, and thus does not have the ability to stabilize the population. The young people leave. Probably the municipality is not attractive enough to motivate the community builder generation 26 to 44 years of age to stay and invest in the municipality. Politicians now have very cheap loans at their disposal and try to make the municipality attractive by investments. Probably new capacities in assets were needed for the increasing population due to the inflow of immigrants during the past 4 years. It is likely that they, too, leave the municipality for better opportunities near or in the big cities. What does the analysis recommend the politicians in Askersund to do? It is easy to understand. The debt level should be brought down below 40,000 Swedish crown per inhabitant. Liabilities corresponding to 600 million Swedish crowns should be paid as soon as possible, and as stated in the calculation on the interface to the left, it is recommended that 30 million Swedish crown per year be paid for a period of 20 years. Let's go to the key factor, asset building capacity again. Here you have once more the key factor, asset building capacity again. When the investments are above the pink curve, it means that loans have been taken. The reverse also applies. When the pink curve or the operating cash flow is greater than investment, there is money available to pay off loans. For 20 years then, the pink line will be above the red line with a difference of 3.5%, equivalent to 30 million Swedish crowns per year. That will raise 600 million Swedish crowns needed. It is easy to understand. Do you think the politicians in this municipality will do it? It's a heavy task. I think the lender will have trouble with this municipality. They will not repay their loans. Who is the lender? It is KommunInvest, a finance company owned by the most Swedish municipalities. It is a finance company from which the member municipalities can request loans. There is no credit rating worth the name used when the loans are granted.
Here we have an important problem. In a country where the politicians do not reform the institutions, but the people, with the picture of Sweden. What does that mean to you as a lender?